Good morning, Red. It's Monday. Photoshop is a relatively simple yet powerful tool, and today I'm going to share with you the essentials to making various multimedia items in the program. And by the essentials, I mean everything that I use in order to make my art, thumbnails, and other items. Because frankly, I'm not exactly a professional. Just a self-taught boy with too much time on his hands and a student license to the suite. This random tutorial assumes you have a basic understanding of how graphics and computers work. If you can use the mouse, you should be okay. So, alright, that's enough lollygagging. Let's begin. First things first, let's make sure we're looking at the same document. Open up a new document, and let's discuss the settings. For YouTube thumbnails, I typically set my aspect ratio to 1920 x 1080 pixels, or 16:9. The PPI, or pixel per inch count, is typically 72. The aspect ratio of your document can vary depending on what you're producing. For example, the canvas of a logo will typically look a lot different from the canvas of a thumbnail. For pixels per inch, the most important thing to note here is that digital content is typically sized in 72. Items designated for print are typically done in 300. The difference in between the two, aside from the general quality of the resolution, is that one of these is really small, and the other one is really quite large. Depending on what you choose, this can have a drastic effect on things like the relative size of fonts. Alright, moving on. Let's make sure we're looking at the same interface. For standard operations, I typically stick with the Photoshop Essentials layout. It's what I learned to practice with, and I haven't had a good reason to experiment with other layouts, except for to toy with the animation tab, but that's a different can of worms. To confirm that this is the case, look at Windows, Workspaces, Essentials, and Default. If you don't see this, or see a slightly modified version, I'm sorry to say, but you must be an alien, or you're using an older build. I don't know, I can't see it from here. For reference, I'm currently running Adobe Photoshop 2020 21.1.2. It's a toolbar. We'll go over some tips and tricks on how to use these, but first, rapid-fire tool introduction. Ready, set, here's a brush. It paints things. If you're an artist, this is your best friend. Make it round, or make it round, but less so. Here's an eraser, the brush's worst enemy, great at hiding the evidence. Here's a lasso tool, use it to select things. Here's a quick selection tool, use it to select things, automatically. This right here is what I'd call your meme maker if you're creative enough. Here's a stock shape, rectangular lasso selector thing. It's the same as the last two, except more geometric. The point is, there are many methods of selecting things. However, there are subtle nuances to each job that require kind of a creative use of them all. This is a text tool. Pretty self-explanatory, I think, but I trust you'll want to make use of it. This is a bucket. A paint bucket, moreover. Throw it here, throw it there, throw it everywhere. Smudge tool. Better at erasing the evidence with more creative means, or creating effective lighting. Blur tool. Now you see me, now you don't. Clone stamp tool. Now you see me, doubly so. Dodge and burn tool. Choose your side of the force. Pen tool. I actually still don't know how to use this one. Can someone make a follow-up tutorial? Rectangle tool. And other shape tools. They create shapes. I'm sure you get the idea. These are only some of the tools that we can utilize in order to create. In fact, if you right-click on any of the icons with the right triangle in the corner, you'll quickly learn that there are an exceptional amount of items to play with. So I'll leave it to you to experiment and see how these work. Most all tools have a variety of options to play with in the top left. For things like the brush tool, you can find different types of brushes and alter its size and color, among other variables. For the marquee tools or the selection tools, you'll often find this arrangement of squares. On other selection tools, you may find a symbol of that tool along with an additional plus or minus variant. For squares, the single white square lets you select an item. If it remains in that setting, it will reset that selection once you select again. The double white square, if selected, will continue adding on to the previous selection if already created. The program typically moves to this setting automatically after the creation of a new selection, at least when using quick selection. One transparent square indicates subtraction. Use it to remove selections accordingly. Finally, the double transparent single square setting creates an intersection, or reduces everything around what you just selected. The rules are exactly the same for other types of selection. Arguably more straightforward on these other ones, actually. Moving on, let's take a look at the layering system. 1 layer, 2 layer, 45 layer. Oh no. Remember, it's not about how many layers you have in this instance, it's about how we use them, and use them we will. There are 3 to 4 things you should know off the bat, if you don't already. This button creates a layer. This button creates a folder, and this button will destroy everything these two loved. I mean, delete things. This up here is the blending options, or opacity list. This is one of the most powerful tools at your disposal here, so please pay attention. This setting can be the difference between effects like this, and effects like this. Here are some of my personal favorites. Normal, exactly the same as when you put it in. Overlay, takes whatever you used and makes it dynamically transparent over another layer. Actually, now that I think about it, that is the story for the majority of blending options. Linear addition, takes the layer and for lack of scientific understanding, usually makes things glow. And finally, screen, and inversely, multiply. Screen removes the dark areas, or in the case of black, removes it entirely, leaving only the image. Multiply does the same thing, but for bright and white. Great for things like adding effects or circumventing the process of selecting through an entire image. Also, do take note of the opacity percentage in this corner here. Using this two-face button here, you can actually generate an assortment of predefined layers that carry a specific function. The two that I use most often are vibrance and curves. Vibrance allows you to control its namesake, as well as contrast and saturation for all the items below it. Curves allows you to control the highs and lows of light. Play with the line here, define a few points, and see what you like. This is typically done at the end of the process. Now then, do me a favor and double-click on one of your layers. Make sure to click off of the preview images, otherwise you may end up generating a new image. Here, you'll find the layer styles, where you can employ all manner of drop shadow, inner glow, bevel and emboss, texture, stroke, so on and so forth. I won't go into too much detail on these features, as I believe they are best understood through experimentation. However, I will show you a few ways that these can be used later in the video. Let's take a look at the toolbar above, why don't we? The File tab, bog standard in any editing program. It's pretty self-explanatory. The Image tab, change the canvas size, mess with some of the color settings, make it black and white, so on and so forth. The View tab. If there's some strange UI on your screen, you can probably find it here and disable it, or enable it, depending on what you're looking for. The Window tab. We use this at the beginning of the video to show workspaces, but you can use it also to customize your layout, or if you mess something up, reset it to the default workspace. And now the Filter tab. Can't draw but still want to have some creative effects? Here's your tab. Go to the Filter gallery, play around with the effects, and see what you like. The last thing I want to touch on before we move on to the example is the standard manipulation shortcuts. And no, I'm not talking about psychological torment. Control-Z is your standard undo command. Keep clicking it to remove all of your terrible mistakes. Inversely, Control-Shift-Z will redo any actions if they were undone, just in case you step back too far. If you're on an older version, you may have to use Control-Alt-Z in order to step back. When working with any image, make sure the layer is selected, and use Control-T to gain free transform. You can now move images anywhere you'd like. Make them big, make them small, or turn them around. Additionally, if you hold Shift, you can mess around with the static dimensions of the image. On the side handles, you can squish or elongate the image. You can do this more dynamically with the corner handles. Secondly, if you hold Control and then manipulate the image, you can alter the perspectives of various images. Pretty cool. I find that this latter function is especially helpful in conjunction with most stock shapes, such as rectangles. Alright, now that we've gone all over this, let's put some of them to use to recreate a thumbnail. This was the original thumbnail for the God Squad episode published about a week ago on Red's channel. It's not a terrible start, but I think we can do a little bit better. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to drag in, since I already have this photo, I'm going to put in Red's image just in the same way that he did it. I'm going to lower the opacity on the background image just because it's a reference and we want to look at it for some inspiration here. First things first, probably going to put the text here so that we can figure out how we want this. It's not going to be complete at this moment in time, and I'm going to fiddle around with the color settings a bit. The hardest part, I would say, is probably choosing the font, because I don't exactly know what the feel is for this. Really, for any of these, I don't exactly go in with a plan, so most of it is just kind of felt out throughout the process. Maybe this will do for now. It'll be a fine placeholder. Alright. So remember those drop shadow settings I had talked about a little bit earlier. Here's where they come into play. I'm going to open up this, I'm going to double click, and we're going to find the layer styles here. I'm going to drop shadow, and mine is set to white here. And I'm going to fidget with the settings until I get it to something that I like. This doesn't look too terribly good at the moment, but it will have to do. Okay, now I'm going to quickly scroll over and steal an image off of Google for the Call of Duty Warzone, because that was the game that he was playing this session around. We're going to download this, and I think, let's see, we probably want a stock image, just something very generic in the background to put, just because it might help supplement a background instead of putting it red, solid. So let's grab this generic one here, let's resize it using Control-T to the degree that we can no longer see the logo, and if we obscure it enough, they shouldn't be able to tell. Now here's the second trick here. This logo is black, but it's kind of hard to see in this instance, so we're going to turn it into white. To do this simply, we're going to go back to our layer styles, and we're going to color overlay. If it's a PNG, then we can change the color. If it's on normal, then we can set it to, in this instance, it will be white. And that should give us our white out logo without having to download a completely separate image. Alright, I'm going to create a new layer here. We're going to employ the bucket tool. I'm going to use red, because it's Red Hooded Gamer, and I figure that red is fitting for most of his thumbnails. So we're going to put that behind him on these bottom layers. I'm assuming you all know how to use layers generally, which is taking things and stacking them on top of each other like paper would in order to make a more cohesive image. So now that we have this red here, I need to, well, we could overlay this. Overlay is definitely something that we could do, but maybe, because it kind of blends too much and shows too much of the background image, let's just keep it normal, and let's lower the opacity a bit in order to make it give this transparent feel, but it's still more of a block. Maybe make this Call of Duty Warzone black, simply so it's more standing out. Colors don't exactly match here, but we're working on it. Okay, messing around with some of the text settings in the top right, which I encourage you to experiment with, trying to get the spacing right on this one. Here, I still don't exactly know what I want to do in regards to kind of this overall image. It's a generic image. It's not a bad image right now, but it's kind of generic. So let's go, and maybe I've decided that Red's image doesn't work here. it just doesn't quite fit the scene. So we're going to take a generic soldier instead. Going back to Google, we're going to gather a few soldiers, actually. We're going to place them down. Here is where we implement things like the automatic selection tool. We could try multiply for this one, but unfortunately, since the actual character is covered in white as well, he becomes a little bit more translucent than we'd like him to be, and therefore making this quite inefficient. So instead, we're going to use the quick selection tool. This quick selection tool, we're going to just kind of scope out this one here. And then what we're going to do, make sure that you have all the edges on this one. Now, there are two things that we can do here. We first feather the selection by right-clicking, clicking feather, and radius, I choose pixel count 5. What this will allow me to do is make it so that there's this nice glowing effect when you do cut it out. To cut it out, I usually right-click, and I layer via copy. And this will create the copy of the image while saving the old image in case we want to go back to it. Alright, so now we have our soldier of sorts. Going to Control-T until he gets to the position that I want him to be. Now I'm going to go back to layer styles, and I played a little bit. I'm actually recording this audio in post, so I'm kind of just watching the playback and hoping that I can commentate over it properly. I went to this red here. I figured we could use some depth. So we go to layer style, inner shadow, play with the settings a bit until we get something that we like. And then, just to make sure that we can kind of pseudo color code this soldier correctly, go back to layer styles, gradient overlay, and choose a random gradient from the respective tab. And now we have this little bit of a reddish tint to him. Now, here's where blending styles come into play. Using a combination of the brush tool, I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to brush over the soldier using normal brush. And then from there, I'm going to change this overlay style to linear add, or I've been saying this wrong the entire linear add or linear dodge. And this will give us this nice little glowing effect here. And I'm just going to keep playing around with the settings here. But now this soldier's looking a bit too stocky, I would say. So to take this even further, going to filter, I'm going to use the cutout setting, and now we have this more generic looking, so you can't exactly distinguish who he is anymore, and I think that works out for this particular one. Since we're going with the God Squad, let's put a Halo PNG there. Let's change some of the settings using inner, shadow, stroke, so on and so forth, and just taking the color code from the Halo above. The title of Call of Duty might want to stick out a little bit more, so let's create a rectangle. But this white block here is a bit too long. It sticks out, it contrasts the rest of the image a bit too much. So now we're going to use that whole control function that I talked about earlier, and we're going to shorten it into a tiny little rectangle in the corner over here. Alright, now let's put some more drop shadow on that, because apparently that is my favorite thing. And in Call of Duty Warzone, there are 3 different soldiers, and there are 3 players per squad, or at least there was at the time of this recording. So let's put 2 more soldiers in there. If we just go back here and we steal from Google again, put him behind the other soldier, can have a row formation. Call of Duty, Modern Warfare, take, steal, images again, because it's the Photoshopper's life apparently. Go back, cutout tool, put on the same effects as we did for the first one, and we should get something of a bit more cohesive image. It's a lot of tweaking like this. It's really just a lot of tweaking like this until you get the image that you want. And then after this, I think, if I stroke on this one here, I want to put a glow in here, because let's just say that this is the main soldier, and this is the one that the people are going to see from the actual thumbnail. So I'm going to put a stroke on him. I'm going to put a white stroke, and then I'm going to select him. I want to get rid of there's more jagged edges on the side of these, if you can see here. And it's much harder to manually erase this. One thing that I forgot to talk about that is worth mentioning is that when you import an image for the first time, it often starts on what is known as a smart layer. And what that really means is that you just can't edit it until you unlock this layer. Typically, this is done so it can preserve itself if you choose to resize it, but in this instance, we want to remove it. So in order to do so, you can either generate a new version of it in a different tab, but the quicker way is to simply use the eraser tool or the brush tool or a similar application and then click on it, and it will give you this setting for a rasterized layer. And if you rasterize the layer, then everything will be fully editable, and it will actually take the layer settings that you used and put them directly on the image. So now we can cut that out. And for efficiency's sake, I'm going to select all of it, and I'm going to feather it again. And when I feather it this time, it should make it a little bit more smooth. It should give it this more glowy effect on the side. And I don't know about you, but that seems like a pretty finished thumbnail for now. It's not my best work by any means. It's not the most creative work, but it will be sufficient for our purposes. So for exporting this, all you need to do is export. We go to export as, then we will get this menu here. I'm going to set it as a JPEG, simply because it's a smaller file size. We have JPEG and we have PNG. The primary difference in between these two is that PNG can be transparent and typically preserves the quality of the image a lot better than JPEG. However, JPEG is typically the preferred method for online images because of their smaller storage size. So if we save this now, export it, and then we send it to Red and haggle him for a bit. And yep, that should be the end of the creation. So that was a little bit of a faster tutorial. That was a little bit of a less explained one. Didn't really go one-to-one on kind of the nuances of it. If you'd like me to explain this on a different, this is mostly just to capture the larger ideas of it. The most of it comes down to practice and working with various images until you get something that you're happy with. These are a few of the insights I have for this program. I get the feeling that there's still a couple of things I missed, so feel free to ask a question if there's something that you don't quite understand, or just general inquiry. Once again, still not an expert by any means, so this is more of a personal preference video. Otherwise, you should be free now to explore the infinite possibilities of Photoshop. So go forth, experiment with your work, and continue to learn. If you liked this video, do so. If you didn't, better luck next time. Alright, that's all for now. Until we meet again, have a good day.